smell of antiseptic never quite leaves you. Even now, sitting in my own kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold beside me, I catch a whiff of something sharp and clinical, and my whole body goes rigid. That's what 8 weeks in Hargrove Psychiatric Centre does to you. It rewires something deep, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My name's Vivian. I'm 29 years old, and until 14 months ago, I believed that family meant safety. I believed it the way you believe the floor will hold your weight, without thinking, without questioning, because why would you? Until the floor gives out beneath you and you're falling, and the worst part isn't the fall. It's realizing the floor was never solid to begin with. My mother passed on a Tuesday in October. Breast cancer, stage 4, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already won. She was 56. She had laugh lines around her eyes and a habit of humming old hymns while she washed dishes. And she kept a small wooden jewellery box on her dresser that she never let me touch when I was little. "That's Mama's private box," she'd say, and wink at me like we were sharing a secret even though I was the one being kept out of it. When she died, my brother was the one who handled everything. His name is Conrad. He's 8 years older than me, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who fills a doorway just by standing in it. He was always my mother's first child in every sense, the one she called when her car made a strange noise, the one she leaned on after our father left when I was 4. I never resented him for that. Conrad stepped up when he didn't have to, and I loved him for it. I loved him right up until he had me committed. In the weeks after my mother's funeral, Conrad managed the estate. There wasn't supposed to be much. Our childhood home in Decatur, Georgia, a savings account, some personal items. My mother had never been wealthy. She worked 31 years as a school librarian. But Conrad told me there would be paperwork, that the probate process was complicated, that I should just let him handle it and focus on grieving. So I did. I was substitute teaching at the time, renting a 1-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from where I grew up. My mother had been my anchor, and without her I felt untethered in a way I hadn't expected. I cried too much. I lost weight. I stopped answering my phone for days at a time. Grief does that to you, and I was letting it. Conrad started coming around more, checking on me, he said. He'd bring food, sit with me, ask how he was sleeping. It felt like love. Looking back, I understand now that he was watching me, taking notes. About 6 weeks after the funeral, he brought a man to my apartment. He introduced him as Dr. Carr Ellison, a friend, a colleague of his wife's just stopping by. Dr. Ellison was soft-spoken and had a way of asking questions that didn't feel like questions. How long had I been having trouble sleeping? Did I find myself forgetting things? Had I been feeling like life wasn't worth living? I answered honestly because I thought he was asking out of concern. 2 days later, Conrad showed up with a woman I didn't recognize and told me there was a bed available at Hargrove Centre, that Dr. Power, Ellison, had recommended a short evaluation, that it would help me process my grief in a structured environment. I said I didn't need that. I said I was fine. I said I just needed time. He had a document. He told me it was voluntary admission paperwork, that I could leave whenever I wanted, that this was just to get me some help. I was exhausted and hollowed out, and he was my brother, so I signed it. It was not voluntary admission paperwork. I didn't understand that until 3 days in, when I asked to leave, and the staff told me my attending physician had placed me on a 72-hour hold, which was subsequently extended and then extended again. I didn't have my phone. I'd left it in Conrad's car because he told me I wouldn't need it. I asked to call someone and they gave me 10 minutes on a landline, and the only number I knew by heart was my mother's, which no one would answer anymore. I want you to understand what those weeks were like, but I'm not sure I can explain it in a way that lands right. Hargrove wasn't a horror movie. The staff were mostly kind. The facility was clean, but being held somewhere you don't want to be, being told your own perceptions are symptoms of illness, being watched and medicated and evaluated by people who've been told a particular story about you, it does something to your sense of reality. It's slow. That's what I couldn't have predicted, how slow it happens. Conrad visited twice. Both times he brought flowers and spoke to the staff warmly and told me I was getting better, that he was proud of me for doing this. He never answered my questions about when I could leave. He'd redirect with such smoothness that I'd forget what I'd asked. His wife, Deidre, came once. She barely looked at me. What kept me grounded? The only thing was a ring on my right hand. My mother's ring. It wasn't expensive, white gold with a small oval moonstone, the kind of thing you'd pass over in an antique shop. She'd worn it every day for as long as I could remember. The night before my mother died, she'd taken it off her own finger and pressed it into my palm and said, "Hold on to this for me, Bug." She called me Bug since I was small. I don't know why. I wore that ring every day at Hargrove. When the confusion got bad, I'd hold my right hand against my chest and feel the small oval shape under my fingers and remind myself who I was. Vivian. 31. My mother called me Bug. The floor can give out, but the ring is still real. There was a man I passed in the hallway sometimes. Not a patient. He wore regular clothes and a visitor badge, and he was always there on Wednesday afternoons sitting with an older woman in the common room. He had grey at his temples, even though he didn't look much past 40. He noticed me the same way I noticed him, which is to say we'd exchanged that brief look that strangers exchange when they keep appearing in each other's peripheral vision. One Wednesday, he was alone. The older woman wasn't there, and he was sitting in one of the chairs near the window with a paper coffee cup and a look on his face like he was rehearsing something difficult. I sat down a few chairs away because the common room was the only place that got afternoon light, and I needed it. He said, "Your ring is unusual." I looked down at it. It was my mother's. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "May I ask, is the setting original, the way the stone sits in the band?" I told him I thought so, that my mother had it for 30 years at least, maybe longer. He set down his coffee cup and looked at me directly for the first time. He had the careful, measuring look of someone who has learned to be precise about things. "I'm sorry to ask you something strange," he said, "but what was your mother's name?" And I told him. "Patricia Ann Mercer, née Holloway," and I watched his face change. His name was Warren. He wasn't a doctor or a therapist or anyone affiliated with Hargrove. He was an estate attorney, and he had been the attorney for my mother's estate. The real estate attorney, the one she had hired herself, privately 2 years before she died. He had been visiting his own mother at Hargrove every Wednesday for 6 months. The coincidence of it is the kind of thing that makes you either believe in something or decide the universe is deeply indifferent and occasionally trips over itself. He knew the ring because my mother had described it to him specifically. She had described it in the context of an addendum to her will, a personal note she'd asked him to include, in which she wrote that the moonstone ring would go to her daughter Vivian, and that Vivian would know to find Warren by the ring itself if she ever needed to. Because my mother had planned for contingencies in a way I hadn't understood until that moment. My mother had known Conrad, not as a stranger, obviously, he was her son. But she had known something about him that I hadn't let myself see. She had watched him in her quiet librarian way, and she had understood something about his relationship to money and to control that I had missed entirely. She had hired Warren without telling anyone. She had structured her estate in a specific way that Conrad would not be able to easily undo, and she had hidden that fact from everyone, including me, because she knew that what I didn't know, I couldn't accidentally reveal. The will Conrad had produced for probate was not my mother's actual will. I didn't know that yet when I was sitting in the common room. I just knew that Warren's face had changed when I told him my mother's name, and that he was gripping the arm of his chair the way people do when they're trying to hold themselves very still. He said he needed to make some calls. He said he needed me to not say anything to anyone on staff about this conversation, and he said it in the particular tone of someone who has dealt with enough difficult situations to know that discretion matters. He said he would be back on Friday. He came back on Friday with a woman named Beverly who was a patient advocate, and a sheaf of documents he spread on the table between us in a conference room while a staff supervisor sat in the corner and looked like she would rather be anywhere else. Beverly explained what a patient advocate does, how she was independent of the facility, how her job was specifically to represent my interests and no one else's. She asked me a series of questions in a methodical, unhurried way, and then she asked the staff supervisor to give us 15 minutes of privacy, which, to her credit, the supervisor did. What followed over the next 3 weeks was not a dramatic rescue. I want to be honest about that because I think those stories do a disservice to how these things actually work. It was paperwork and phone calls and a re-evaluation ordered by a different physician and a formal challenge to the legality of my admission. It was slow and grinding, and there were days when I was convinced it wasn't going to work because Conrad had gotten to someone, had said something to someone, had managed to make me sound exactly as unstable as he needed me to sound. But Beverly was relentless in the way that quiet people are sometimes relentless, with none of the noise of it showing on the surface. I was discharged on a Thursday morning in January. Conrad didn't know it was happening. He found out when Warren served him with legal notice that same afternoon. I went to a hotel. Beverly had helped me access a small amount of my own money. I had a checking account Conrad hadn't touched, and I stayed there for 4 days while Warren explained to me what had actually happened. My mother's estate was not small. This is the part Conrad had hidden, the part I had never known, because my mother had kept it from me in the same protective way she'd hidden her plans for the ring. She had inherited money from her own mother, my grandmother, who I barely knew, who had died when I was 7, and she'd invested it quietly over 30 years, not in flashy ways. In an index fund, through a financial advisor she'd found through her church. She added to it when she could. She never mentioned it. When she knew she was sick, she hired Warren. She updated her will. She left the house to be sold and split between Conrad and me. She left her personal items to me, and she left the investment account, which had grown over 3 decades to just over $340,000, entirely to me, with the specific legal language that it was not to be considered a joint asset or subject to contest by any other beneficiary. Conrad had found out about it when she died. He had hired his own attorney, found someone willing to be creative, and produced a version of the will that made no mention of the investment account. He planned to liquidate it quietly once he had full control of the estate. The plan required removing me from the picture long enough, confusing me, discrediting me, getting a diagnosis on record to challenge my ability to contest anything. It was meticulous. It was patient. It was the kind of plan only someone who has watched you your whole life could design, because it required knowing exactly how to make you look. I sat in Warren's office and listened to him explain this, and I felt very little, which I understand now is a common response to a certain kind of grief, the grief that comes not from death, but from the realization that someone you loved was someone else entirely. There was a custody dispute between us, not children, but paperwork, accounts, the house that was listed for sale with Conrad as the sole authorized party. Warren had already flagged the irregularities with the probate court. The process of untangling it was going to take months. I called my best friend Janelle from my hotel room that night. We had drifted during my mother's illness. I had been so consumed with caregiving that I'd let almost every friendship thin out, and I hadn't spoken to her in 4 months. She answered on the second ring and I said, "I need to tell you something that's going to sound unbelievable." And she said, "I'm already sitting down, go ahead." That's the thing about real friendships. They can absorb a gap without the foundation cracking. Janelle drove up from Savannah the next morning with her car packed with things. A casserole dish, 2 kinds of tea, a weighted blanket, and approximately 14,000 opinions about Conrad, which she delivered with the kind of controlled fury that I needed to borrow because I didn't yet have access to my own. I stayed with her for 2 months while Warren worked. The probate court eventually appointed an independent administrator to review the estate. The fabricated will was flagged within 3 weeks of that appointment. Conrad's attorney withdrew from the case in early March. Conrad hired someone else and tried to claim that he had acted in good faith, that he hadn't known about the secondary will, that he had simply used the documents he'd found in my mother's files. Warren had emails. My mother, who had never been a particularly tech-savvy woman, had nonetheless understood the importance of a paper trail. She had corresponded with Warren entirely through a private email account that Conrad knew nothing about, and in those emails she had been explicit, careful, measured, precise, about her concerns regarding her son's relationship with money and what she feared might happen after she was gone. She had seen it. She had planned for it. She had trusted that I would find the ring and the ring would find Warren, and she had been right. In April, the court ruled in my favor. The investment account was released to me. Conrad was required to account for every dollar of estate funds he had accessed in the preceding 6 months, and the discrepancies resulted in a civil fraud finding that will follow him for a long time. He never apologized. I wasn't expecting him to. What I thought about most in the months since is my mother sitting at her kitchen table with Warren across from her, explaining what she wanted to do and why. I've thought about her pressing the ring into my palm the night before she died. And whether she knew in that moment that she was giving me a lifeline, or whether she just wanted me to have something of hers, and the lifeline was the plan she'd already put in place. I think it was both. I think she was two things at once, the way people are when they love you and are also afraid for you. I didn't quit my teaching job through any of this. I want to say that clearly because it matters to me. I went back to subbing 6 weeks after I was discharged. I took a long-term placement at a middle school in Decatur. I bought a reliable used car. I found a therapist who specializes in family trauma and institutional harm and who doesn't flinch when I describe what the inside of a psychiatric facility looks like from the inside when you're not supposed to be there. I'm not okay in the smooth, resolved way that stories sometimes end. I still smell antiseptic sometimes and feel my chest tighten. I still catch myself watching people's faces for the particular shift that Conrad's face made when he was about to redirect me. I still have days when I don't trust my own memory, which is one of the lasting gifts of having your perceptions systematically questioned for 8 weeks. But I have the ring. I wear it on my right hand. And I have the $340,000 which my mother grew over 30 years by adding what she could when she could, consistently, without drama, without anyone else knowing. I've left most of it where it is. I've added to it. I intend to do what she did, quietly, steadily, without depending on anyone else to hold what's mine. She called me Bug, because when I was 3 years old I used to collect roly-poly bugs in a little jar and carry them around the house like they were precious things. I had forgotten that until Janelle reminded me because Janelle had heard the story from my mother years ago at a birthday dinner. Memory is like that. It lives in other people too, and sometimes that's the only way it survives. If you're listening to this and you have a brother or a sister or anyone who has made you feel like your perception of your own life is the problem, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to tell you that I know what it's like to sign something because you trusted someone and to spend weeks wondering if you were the one who was wrong. I'm here to tell you that a moonstone ring and an attorney my mother hired in secret were the things that brought me back. I'm here to tell you my mother saw it coming and built me a door, and that all I had to do was find it. I found it. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all this happened. Not in an abstract way, in the very specific way you think about it when you've watched someone's plan collapse under the weight of its own construction. Conrad spent months building something designed to erase me. He recruited a doctor. He manipulated paperwork. He studied my grief and used it like a tool. And the thing is, it almost worked. Not because he was smarter than me, but because I trusted him. I handed him the door and he walked right through it. But here's what he didn't account for. My mother was smarter than both of us. She saw what I couldn't see because love has a way of blinding you to the people closest to you. She sat across a desk from Warren and she said quietly and without drama, "I'm worried about what my son will do after I'm gone." And then she built a system that didn't depend on Conrad doing the right thing, or me being strong enough to fight him alone, or the world being fair. She assumed the worst and she planned accordingly. That's not pessimism. That's a particular kind of wisdom that I'm only beginning to understand. What I keep coming back to is this. Every choice Conrad made came back to him, not because the universe punishes bad behavior on some cosmic schedule, but because deception is structurally unstable. It requires maintaining too many false things simultaneously. It requires other people staying confused, staying isolated, staying unable to compare notes. The moment Warren sat down in that common room and I told him my mother's name, the whole structure Conrad had built started to crack. Not from the outside, but from within, because he had built it on the assumption that my mother's planning hadn't reached further than he could see. She had reached further. I think about the ring a lot. A small white gold band with a moonstone. My mother wore it every day for 30 years, and I never once thought to ask where it came from. She pressed it into my palm the night before she died, and I took it as a keepsake, as grief comfort, as something to hold on to. I didn't know it was also a key. I didn't know she had told Warren to watch for it. That's what real intelligence looks like, I think. Not the showy kind, not the kind that announces itself, the quiet kind that works even when the person who built it is no longer in the room. I'm not the same person I was before Hargrove. I don't think I'll ever fully be her again. But I'm not sure I want to be. That version of me signed documents because she trusted her brother. That version of me didn't have a financial advisor. didn't have a patient advocate's number saved, didn't know what her own rights were inside a psychiatric facility. She trusted the floor to hold. I know how to check the floor now. I go to therapy every other week. I've started contributing regularly to an investment account, the same kind my mother had, through a financial advisor I found myself, whose number is saved in my phone and also written down in a notebook that Janelle keeps for me. I sub full-time now at a school where the 7th graders are exhausting and funny and occasionally break my heart in the best way. I wear the ring every day. Right hand, same finger my mother wore it on. If there's anything I want you to take from this, it's not that family will betray you, because maybe yours won't. It's that knowing your own finances, your own rights, your own documents, that's not paranoia. That's the thing my mother understood and built her whole quiet plan around. You don't need to distrust everyone. You just need to know what's yours. Know what's yours. Hold on to it. And if someone tries to convince you that your own clear memory of events is a symptom of illness, find the ring. Find the door your mother built. She built it because she loved you. And she assumed you'd be smart enough to walk through it. I was. Eventually.